Hey, I'm Mr. Williamson, and this video is about evidence for evolutionary relationships, specifically fossils. Before we get started, make sure you're taking good notes. I'm not going to go into the whole Cornell outline thing. You've heard it enough times, but you do whatever mows your lawn. All right, let's get started. Here's the thing. We've talked about what evolution is. It's the change in the gene frequency from one generation to the next. We've talked about adaptations and how it works. All right, and we've looked at like how it works, like variation, overpopulation, competition, survival of the fittest, and reproduction. That results in evolution. We've talked about the adaptations that take place, the morphological, the physiological, and the behavioral adaptations. If you don't understand any of that, you probably want to watch some of the earlier videos. All right. We're now going to look at the evidence for evolution. How can we show that it's taking place? All right. Well, there's four kinds of evidence: fossils, comparative embryology, comparative anatomy, and comparative biochemistry. In this one, we're going to talk about fossils in particular. When we talk about fossils for evidence for evolution, we're really also kind of including the comparative anatomy, because what we're doing with the fossils is comparing past life to current life and seeing how it changed. All right. So what are we talking about in talking about fossils? Well, fossils are the remains or impression of a prehistoric organism preserved in petrified form as a mold or cast in rock. That's a fossil. And when I say the word fossil, you probably think of these guys, the big T-Rex over here, okay, or the fish on the thing, something like that. That's what most students think about when they think of fossils. Well, it's not the only thing. That's the thing that I want you to understand. Fossils, in some ways, can be the actual remains. All right, but before we get there, we need to talk about how do they form. And I covered it up. This is good work here. I covered up the word that I want. Most fossils are found in sedimentary rock. I'll put some kind of little note here, like how to spell that. Why? Because there's only three kinds of rock: sedimentary, metamorphic, or igneous. Igneous rocks are like lava, and there's not a lot that you're not gonna. If you die and get covered with lava, you're burning up. So there's nothing going to be remaining. Metamorphic rocks are rocks that are heated up and are under pressure and have changed. So they usually don't find them there, although you could find them in some metamorphic rocks, and those are metamorphic rocks that come from sedimentary rocks. The way a fossil is formed is, one, the animal has to die. Okay, hopefully you figured that out. But then we need to cover it up very quickly, because if it doesn't get covered up quickly, the body decomposes or is scavenged on by other scavengers. Other animals and other organisms eat them. So you start out with an animal that dies underneath the soil. It gets buried quickly. So usually we find fossils in places where there was water. Which is contrary to what you would think, because water is a place where decomposition takes place much easier. If you dry it out, like in the desert, the things like the mummies, they were dried, they were desiccated, the water was removed from them by evaporation, and they lasted a long time. But when you cover it up with water, it not water, it's the mud, the sediment. So it's in a flash flood type situation, or a landslide type thing, where you're covered up very quickly, the organism's covered up very quickly, and nothing disturbs it. And then it's left that way for a long period of time. And after a while, you have this, screwed that slide up, that first slide up. After a while, you start to go down and get covered up by other layers as more sediment is put on top. So you become a fossil. And eventually, in a lot of fossils, the ones that you think of, the dinosaur bones, things like that, the bones are actually replaced with minerals. The bones are, the calcium in the bone is actually replaced by minerals, and they become actually rocks. All right? And this is where I think it was William Smith who said that the older rocks are down at the bottom, geological dating. Okay? So these are older, these are younger, and as each layer is put down, any organisms trapped inside of them are fossilized. So that's why Smith's idea of the older rocks on the bottom and the younger on the top, we could tell how old, how the relationship and age of the fossils that we're talking about. All right. But we don't have to necessarily talk about like the dinosaur bones. We could be looking at the actual remains of some organisms. For instance, the woolly mammoth. It lived about 10 to 15,000 years ago during the last ice age. And at that point, the glaciers came all the way down, like down to Southern California area, like Yosemite. California had glaciers. From that point up, glaciers. And man was living there, and the woolly mammoth was living there. And when it died, because it was ice. Why do you put things in an ice box or a freezer? Because it preserves them. All right. Well, we have found past life in the tundra of the woolly mammoth. This is a woolly mammoth baby. It's not an actual size, of an adult, but it's a baby who probably died, was frozen, and then eventually covered up. Because of the cold, it preserved it. I don't know if we could call this really a fossil by the definition, but I think it would. It's past life, evidence of past life. And this is actually so preserved, they can get DNA out of it. They can look at what it had for its last meal and things like that. Even find parasites on the inside and outside of the body. All right. We can look at past life of man. This is the Tulland man. He was found in a peat bog, which I'll explain here in a minute. A peat bog in Scandinavia. And they actually think he is completely preserved. Now, he's not that color. The peat bog is actually a very acidic swamp almost. And like I said, I'm going to show you a picture of what a peat bog looks like. Where the acidity has caused the organisms that would cause decomposition to die. They prevent decomposition because of the acidity of the environment. But it also is like coffee or tea. There's a lot of tannic acid in there, and it discolors the organism, discolors the man. And they're not sure whether he was sacrificed or murdered, one of the two. And he's not the only bog person. That's really what they call him, bog person, that they have found. But he's probably one of the best preserved. Like his hat, his clothing, everything is there. All right. This is a peat bog, and you can see where layers of peat, and it's basically it's almost like a swamp that as the organisms, the plants die and decompose and new ones grow, they just they fall down to the bottom and they just keep covering up everything. But as they decompose, the plants, they created a very acidic environment. And in Ireland, they actually not farm, but they use peat for fuel. They've recently stopped doing that because of climate change, but you can see the layers, the sedimentary layers of the peat as it's built up, and they found that guy in there. All right. This is the next part I'm going to show you is another human being, the remains. He died about 3,500 BC, so we're talking almost 600 years ago, 6,000 years ago. Bad math. 6,000 years ago. His name is Otzi, or something like that. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Basically, what happened was there were some hikers that were hiking up on a mountain in Germany, I think, somewhere in there, in Europe. And they came around a corner and they got off the trail a little bit, and they found a body behind a boulder. And they thought it was like, somebody had died on the mountain in the storm the day or two beforehand. And so they went down and got the police, and the police came up and they investigated, and they went, yeah, this guy's been dead a little longer than just a couple days. He's been dead for like 6,000 years, 5,000 years, somewhere in there. This is the way they found him. This is actual, a picture of them, not of them with their discovery. And they have pulled him out, and they have done a complete examination of his body. His remains are really, really good. Apparently, he was killed. He was... what they think happened, he was from a different area, and he was wandering around the countryside or the country, and he wandered into somebody else's territory, some other group's territory, who hunted him or tried to kill him, because he had in his shoulder blade, he had arrow points, he had been wounded several times, and they think that he probably got away. His wounds weren't bad enough to kill him right away, but he went and hid and died where he hid. And that's why he was left there, and they never found him again. But when they examined him, they found all kinds of tattoos. All right, something like 23 tattoos. There's 15 of them, and they were all actually significant to his body, because they were corresponding with acupuncture points right now and acupressure points. There were marks where if you put like an acupuncture, if you put a needle in a certain place, it affects this type of thing or that kind of thing. So the marks they believe were medical, or to help whoever the medical person was identify where to do certain things. He also had different implements, tools. These are replicas of it. He had a sling. The sling is this thing up here, and it kind of the strap you whirl it around like like a slingshot. He had a knife with a sheath, so it was protecting it. He had tools, and the actual ones look like this. You can see like this is leggings protection. These are his shoes. You can see this is parts of his top up here, and they found his hat, and it's all preserved really, really well. So and they can also, they've looked at what he ate recently, and his weapon, bow and arrow, and all that. And like I said, they knew he was wounded several times, and they think that the one that killed him was probably the one in the shoulder blade, because the arrow tip was still in there. But that would be Otzi, the Iceman. Okay, but we can go back to like looking at preserved organisms like amber. The whole story of Jurassic Park. The whole premise was that we could take an insect, a biting insect, from amber. Well, amber is basically just tree sap that has fossilized, is mineralized. And if you've ever got tree sap on, like pine sap, it's sticky, really sticky. So if an insect lands in it, it can't get out. And then the next, if the tree is injured, that's why you get tree sap. Like if the tree's been cut or scratched or something, the sap flows out and it'll flow over that insect. Well, if you have an insect like the mosquito down here, all right, that had bitten an animal beforehand, like a dinosaur, which they apparently did, they lived at the same time, they would have the DNA in their body. And the Jurassic Park, the whole theory was that you could take the stomach contents out of this, because it is actually the organism. It's not an impression. It's not a cast. It's the actual insect with all the DNA and everything in it. You could take the DNA out and get the dinosaur DNA and then clone that to make a dinosaur. I'm not sure you can do that. I think you got a better chance with the woolly mammoth because it's actually preserved. But we also found like flies here. We found, what the heck was that? Flies. We have like ants, and we have spiders. They're all captured. We have the actual remains, and we can compare those to organisms that are in current existence. And then finally, we also have casts and molds, and there is a difference. I don't expect you to know it. A cast is kind of I'm trying to show you a cat. This would be a mold. I hate that color. It's too white. This would be the mold. So you're showing that the footprints of a dinosaur. This would be a mold, the fern leaf down here and the fern here, the plants. And those are the things that we have like of jellyfish and worms who don't have hard parts like bones or teeth. We have casts. We have of them. All right. And then this is one of my favorites. That's actually the cast of a dinosaur skin. All right. So the dinosaurs died. It was covered with the mud or the silt. And the cast that was left, not the mold. The mold would be kind of the dinosaur. The cast that was left showed the skin and the scales of the dinosaur. So that's the fossil evidence for evolutionary relationships. And again, what are we going to do with that information? We're going to take that and compare current living things to past living things and take a look at how they've evolved. All right. Hopefully you took good notes. Probably ought to go over what you really want. You want to know what you need to know. You need to know what a fossil is. You need to know that it's probably formed in sedimentary rock. It could be landslide or a flood type things, flash flood type thing. How do they form? The organism dies and is covered up quickly so that no decomposition takes place, and then it's left undisturbed for a long period of time. Conditions have to be pretty good to do that. We also looked at the actual remains of like a mammoth in the tundra, or the two men, the bog man, or Otzi, the iceman. Or we could look at like resin, okay? And those are just some of the examples of fossilized remains of past life. Like I said, hope you took good notes. If you have any questions, ask me in Edpuzzle or in class. Good luck.